Hello and welcome to our crowd-funded dig at Earth Trust in Oxfordshire. In this live stream, we're going to take you on a tour of the site, show you some of our star finds and highlights, get a live update from Amy and Karina in the finds room, and have a Q&A session with our archaeologists. We're also going to hope that you're going to help us solve a little bit of a mystery as well. As we go along, we'll be presenting some evidence and asking you what you think it all means. Before we get started, we want to say a huge thank you from us and from everyone at Earth Trust to all of our crowdfunders who have made this dig possible. Whether you've joined us in the field, in the finds room, or are supporting the dig from home, this dig could not have happened without you. So, I am here at Earth Trust in Oxfordshire at the foot of Whittenham Clumps, a famous Iron Age hill fort by the Thames. This is where we found a huge Roman building right on top of a much older Iron Age settlement. The discoveries we've made here have begun to reveal the story of a Romano-British family who lived and worked the land here in the 3rd to 4th centuries AD. From Roman kitchen utensils to the arrival of the first pet dogs in Roman Britain, these discoveries are giving us a glimpse into everyday family life and an everyday family home. They've also started to reveal what life was like for the Iron Age people and animals who were living on this site before the Romans arrived. But our biggest question is about the Roman building itself. Why was it so big? And what was it for? And did anyone actually live here? This year, our goal is to uncover the rest of the building to try and find out. And doing so is no small task. When I say this building is huge, it really is huge. It's at least 30 metres long and 15 metres wide, with a double row of columns down the middle. This tells us that the building itself is an aisled hall style building, a really unique and fascinating type of building. They're unique for a couple of reasons. Firstly, they're more common in Britain than they are on the continent. There's been around maybe 200 or so that have been found so far out of an estimated 2,000 Roma villa estates across Britain. The thing is that each one of these buildings is unique. There is no standard blueprint for these buildings. Each one is adapted by its owners to suit their needs, and by uncovering them, we can understand more about the lives that they were living and what their needs really were. They're also fascinating because this type of building could vary so much. They range from being used as farm buildings, such as grain storage, to luxurious residences complete with baths, underfloor heating, and mosaics. What's really interesting, though, is that they can range from the very simple to the extremely ostentatious. So the example that we have of Stoke, where it is being used as grain storage, but it's absolutely ostentatious. It is decorated with enormous windows, doors, carvings, and all sorts of figurines and decorations on the outside of the building. By contrast, they could also be quite simple. But you also had ones that were used as homes and houses. Again, they could be quite simple, but they could also be quite luxurious and ostentatious, like the example that we have at Stroud. You can see that there were bathhouses, a shrine, underfloor heating, mosaics, and all sorts used in this type of building. So the building itself was converted into a luxury home. But there is also a third option. It's not necessarily just a farm building or just a fancy house. It could also be a mixed use or multi-purpose building that combined living and working space together. They can also be more than one story. They could have a second floor and be a 2-story building where people were living upstairs and working and storing things downstairs, like the example that we can see here at Barkham Villa. From last year's excavation, we know that our building already is an aisled hall style building, but we don't yet know where on this spectrum of simple to fancy, farm building to home it falls. And that's what we wanted to find out this year. So we've expanded our excavation area to see if we could capture the rest of the building and capture the entire footprint of the building. You can see here on the screen where we dug in grey last year and how much more of the building area we've opened up this year to try and capture the rest of it. Over the last 3 weeks, we've had over 350 adults and children come to help us do it. And what a fantastic group of venturers they've been. Together, we have made some truly impressive discoveries. The first thing we've realised is that we're going to need a bigger trench and we're going to need to come back because the building has expanded. There are walls shooting off to the west and more rooms to the north that are continuing under our spoil heaps. And in order to see the full footprint of the building, we're going to need to make our trench even bigger. But from what we've dug so far, we've found lots of interesting Roman items like glass and pottery. We've revealed much more of the building itself. And we've also found lots of Iron Age evidence showing through. When you look at the footprint of the building, the aerial photo, you can see in white the outline of the Roman building, and underneath the dark splodges that are the Iron Age features underneath. Roundhouses, storage pits, enclosure gullies, and all sorts. But more on all of that later. First things first, let's take a walk through our Roman building and see what evidence have we collected so far and what does that evidence start to tell us about what the building was used for. Along the way, we want to know what you think. So here's a tour for you to watch.
So we're here on our crowdfunded dig at Earth Trust in Oxfordshire, and behind me we have the remains of a huge Roman building right on top of an even older Iron Age settlement. And when I say the Roman building is huge, I really do mean huge. It's about 15 metres wide by 30 metres long, with a double row of columns down the inside. And that tells us that it's an aisled hall type building. But what was that building actually used for? That is exactly what we're trying to find out. And what were the lives of the people who were living here before that building was built? What were their lives like? That's the other question we're trying to answer. So let's go and take a look at some of the evidence that we've dug up, and we'll try and figure out, was the building used mainly as a farm building for storage and for grain? Was it somewhere that people lived? Or was it a combination of the two, a mixed use building where people not only stored things and kept animals and had workshops, but maybe also lived and worked as well? Let's go and take a look at the evidence. So the first thing to look at are the Roman column bases. So there's a double row of them running the whole length of the building down the middle. And what we can see is that the column bases here are really quite large. They're substantial. They're about 1 metre or 1.5 metres by 1 metre and 1.5 metres. And that suggests they were holding pillars and columns that were really substantial, huge, tall oak columns. And with things that size, it could suggest that the building was not a single-storey building, but potentially 2 stories. So a ground level for animals and farming, and a second level perhaps where people lived. That's just one piece of evidence. We've got much more. Come on over here and have a look. In front of us we can see the footprint of the building itself and the corner over here, coming around and shooting off the whole length of this excavation area as well. But what you can see as well is that where Piper is sitting, and where she's excavating with Bjorn, there's a gap in the wall, which we think is probably where there was a huge doorway, possibly a double arched entrance. Either way, really big enough for a cart to come in with a load of grain or other things. Next to it, however, where Ben is standing, is where things start to get really interesting. So let's go and ask Ben and have a look at what we've got. Ben, yes. How are you doing, and what have we got here, and what is it telling us about this building?
Well, we've got some exciting archaeology emerging in front of us here. So as you've just heard, we're at the entrance to our building, and we have this lovely stack of tiles. So we've got 1, 2, 3 levels of tiles surviving on top of a mortared base, mortared directly onto the ground. So this is surviving, what we call in situ, originally where it was constructed by the Romans, and it's right pretty much in the middle of our entranceway. Interestingly, we seem to have found another one just next to it. It's underneath this plastic covering to protect it at the minute, but we've got the very foundation mortar material of another one. So there would have been one just like this, we think, right next to it here.
So what do we think it is? Because when we first arrived and saw this tile stack, we got really excited and thought maybe it's part of a hypercore system, an underfloor heating system that allows hot air to flow through, and maybe it was a sign that this building was domestic and quite fancy. However, as we've kept digging, we've found that maybe the stacks are too big, too broad to be part of a hypercaust. So what do we think they might be now?
So at the minute, what I'm thinking is, as you're saying, they're too big to be hypercaust, and we've got a couple of them in the middle of the entranceway. So what that's telling me is that probably what we've got is supporting something really substantial, like a raised, really solid high floor level, and that's probably for a room that's going that way under our spoil heap, of course, and that might have been used for keeping like grain dry on a raised floor, so there's airflow underneath, to stop it rotting away and stop animals coming up and eating it and ruining it. So we could have some really substantial pillars for a nice solid floor level here, or not, but we'll see as the dig continues.
So it's an interesting evolution of what we thought. And what about just behind you? This is also kind of interesting.
Yes, this is. So we excavated this out a day or two ago. Originally, we thought we had a ditch coming through here. You can see where we've taken out the fill. And you can hopefully also see on the camera that it's filled with these pieces of tile, Roman roofing tile. We have lots of pottery, animal bone, iron nails, that sort of thing coming out as well. And what that's telling us is that this feature is filled with demolition rubble from a previous structure that was here before our aisled hall building. And we know that because the walls of the aisled hall building are constructed cut through this demolition material. So there's been an earlier building here as well.
Wow, so we found out that not only is this building huge, maybe has 2 stories, has a really big doorway, it also has rooms shooting off over in that direction, maybe for grain and having some kind of underfloor heating system, but that there's also another building underneath it as well. So,
and this might have been where the wall was, and it's been robbed out, taken away.
This building doesn't sit still. It is growing and evolving with every day that we dig. There's new evidence. It's really fascinating. Thank you, Ben. I'm going to go and take us on the tour just over here and have a look at some of the other bits that we're finding.
Brilliant. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. Let's go. So, as we can see over here, there is much, much more wall. You can see the wall shooting all the way off down there. It's really substantial, and we're excavating through it to understand more about the construction. But it's not just the Roman stuff that we're looking at. Underneath it, there are the remains of an even older Iron Age village. There are the footprints of roundhouses, enclosures, but also of storage pits. And this is probably the most interesting and exciting of them all. So this is a huge cluster of Iron Age pits. They're really characteristic because each one is perfectly round, vertical sides, flat bottoms. It's where people would have kept things like their grain and their food, almost like the equivalent of an Iron Age fridge or pantry. At least that's what we thought these were being used for. When we got to the bottom of these ones, we found that right at the bottom, if you look closely, you can see what looks like the skeleton of a cow, an almost complete one. And what's really interesting about that is that it looks like basically an almost complete cow was placed in the bottom of this pit. And that's really unusual because you wouldn't really want to discard a large piece of meat like that, get rid of it. So it suggests this pit wasn't then being later reused for rubbish and for throwing things away. It wasn't the remains of food. This looks like an intentional deposit of an animal, placed there for some kind of significant reason, whether it's an offering, a sacrifice, a burial of an important animal. We can't be entirely sure, but what it does show is that these pits had a second life where they were being used for ceremonial or ritual or significant reasons where things had meaning. And that these pits not only tell us about what people were eating and what they were storing, but also about what they believed and how animals fitted into that story. And on that note, we have something even more interesting to go over and look at. So also from the Iron Age, also to do with animals, also to do with pits. So come on over this way. We're going to speak to Olivia, who is digging something really interesting. Hi, Olivia. Hi. Really good, and really interested in coming to see what you've got over here. I'm going to just pop around the side and sit next to you so that we can see exactly what's happening. So we can see this pit, and we can see something in the pit. Yes. Would you like to take the trowel and tell us all about it?
Thank you. Yeah, so we've got a lovely articulated skeleton of a dog here, laid out on its side. So you've got its legs, its forelegs going that way, and tail going out into the back there. And we thought it would be buried on the bottom of the pit, but we're digging down now, and we've still not found the bottom. Yeah, but we have found a tiny, small, articulated skeleton here, which I'm trying to uncover. So you can see a couple of the bones there and there.
So that's really interesting. We've got not just one animal in here, a dog buried in a pit, but another one right next to it, whether it's a mouse or a cat or a tiny little animal, we don't know yet, but we look forward to getting the bones out so that someone can have a look. But again, what's interesting about this pit is there is a complete animal buried in here. And you don't just do that for no reason. It must have some sort of significance. And unfortunately, we can't know why they buried this dog here. Was it a much-loved hunting dog? Was it sacrificed? Was it given as an offering to the gods? We don't know. But hopefully by digging a little bit more, we might find a little bit more evidence. And either way, it does tell us something about the Iron Age people who are living here, their beliefs, and the animals that they lived here with as well. Lovely. Well, I will let you carry on because there's a lot of work to do here. But enjoy it, and there we go. So behind us you can see that the building continues. We're standing at the moment in the main part of the Roman building, carries on that way with an extension where another team of excavators are also continuing to dig to try and understand when that extension was added and what it was used for. But that is another story, and we shall leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us on the tour, and to all of our crowdfunders who have helped this dig happen. We hope that by looking at all of this evidence, we will finally begin to build up a picture of what this building was used for, the people who lived here and the Iron Age people who were here before them.
So now you've seen a tour and you've seen what we've got on site, it's time to throw the question out to those of you who are watching. How do you think this building was used? What does the evidence that we've got so far tell us? Was it a barn? Was it a house? Or was it a mixture of both? Let us know what you think in the chat and we'll review the evidence together. So to recap, we've got the main part of the building with huge internal columns, possibly 2 stories. We've also got in the top right, highlighted in green, the really large entranceway where things will have come in and out of the building. Down the middle, you can see where the columns have been highlighted. And on the left-hand side of the picture, you can also see the extension. We also know from speaking to Ben that we've got some kind of underfloor heating system, not necessarily domestic, but potentially farm use because it's so big. And we've also got multiple phases. There's more of the building being demolished and rebuilt. And as well as the extension to the west, it looks like we might have additional rooms to the north at the top of the building under the spoil heap as well. So tell us what you think. Really intrigued to hear what you think in the chat. Was it a farm building? Was it a house? Or do you think it could have been a bit of both? Of course, this isn't the only evidence we've got. There is, of course, all of the artifacts that we've uncovered so far. So let's bring in Amy and Karina, who are out on site at the moment in the finds tent. Hello, Amy.
Hiya. Hi everyone, I'm Amy from Earth Trust and we manage the landscape here today. And we're absolutely delighted to have Dig Ventures join us to help us understand what happened in the past. So we're at the finds room, and I'm just going to come back a little bit. Hopefully you can see the trenches where everyone's been digging over the past couple of weeks. And now I'm going to turn it to the where you can see everyone who's doing the finds this morning. And then here's Karina from Dig Ventures.
Hi there. So we've got my amazing team of finds processors here. I'm cleaning lots of different types of artifacts. We've got ceramic building material, pottery, animal bone, we've got iron nails, oyster shells. And my team here are cleaning them so that we can see exactly what types we've got, what's happening to, the, say, the animal bone, what items they're using to build the building, and with the pottery, whether it's local wares or it's come from further away. So without cleaning, we couldn't do that. We couldn't identify these things.
Great. Now let's talk about some of the Roman finds. Can you show us what you found previously?
Yes. So last year, we found this amazing Leviticus bowl. Actually, it might have been the year before. I forget. However, we know it's a Victus bowl because right in the centre you can see the stamp from Victus. And this stamp shows us that this particular potter was making this, and he was based in Lisieux in France, which means that this piece was imported in. Now, generally, a lot of our finds of this kind of samenware are becoming out in small sherds, but we're lucky enough to have a whole piece here.
Wow, that's absolutely stunning, isn't it?
Kept in bubble wrap for safety.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I wanted to show you as well is we have this absolutely beautiful little child bracelet. And it looks like it was resized from an adult's bracelet to a child's bracelet. And this shows that maybe we like to think maybe a parent has resized their own jewellery so that their child can have it, which is just a lovely example of kind of domestic life here at our Roman old farm.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, isn't it? So, can you show us some of the recent finds?
We've had some really, really amazing recent finds, actually. I'm going to start off actually by showing you this really beautiful piece of Roman glass. Now, we know it's Roman glass because it has air bubbles in it. Now, when we make glass, we're able to control the oxygen that goes into glass much easier, so we don't tend to have those air bubbles. The Roman glass still has a few, which is how we can identify it. And also, it has this beautiful iridescent sheen to it as well, which also tells us that it's Roman. And I just think it's so lovely. And this has probably come from maybe a nice drinking cup, something like that. We also have a wide variety of pottery. We have local wares, and we've also got a few things that have been imported, like our amazing Victus bowl. So I'm going to start with this piece. It's actually one of my favourite pieces. It's a really sturdy, large rim sherd. Now you can see the shape of it, and the shape will help us to recreate what it would have looked like. And this top would have been absolutely massive, probably coming all the way round and down, and most likely used either for storage or cooking or both. Now this particular piece has some patches of darkness on it, and this shows me that it's probably has been in a fire. Sort of a few lines around here, and it's just been repeatedly used for cooking. The other interesting thing about this pottery as well is you can see inside we have inclusions. These are small parts of stone and pottery, old bits of pottery that have been put into the material to help the heat spread more evenly through the pot when it's being fired. And how I know that this is a Roman pot as opposed to Iron Age, because more typically we would see that kind of internal fabrics in Iron Age pot, is that this particular piece, and actually all the Roman pieces, have these long lines, these striations across this, and this shows us that it's been wheel thrown, and wheel thrown pottery doesn't come in until the Roman period. This is a very, very Roman, very domestic piece of pottery that we've got here, something that will be used every single day. This is like the pot that you would use at home. And we also have some finer pieces as well. We've got a few fragments here of Roman mortaria. Now, Roman mortaria is where we get the word for mortar or mortar and pestle. And we'd expect in Roman mortaria to have these tiny little stones pressed into the base. And they're usually quite large. This is a small piece, but they're usually quite large, thick pieces, whereas this is quite a thin piece. So I imagine that this particular piece of mortaria is more likely to be used for maybe grinding herbs and spices, as opposed to, say, the bigger ones that could have been used for bread making or meat grinding. However, this other piece that we have doesn't really have much evidence of these stones. So I think that this particular piece may be actually, rather than just for grinding, it could actually be more of a serving dish. It's got these lovely classic mortaria kind of like wings on them. This is a really good handle for carrying your bowl. And what's especially fantastic about this piece is that inside, I'm going to bring you a little bit of a close up. We've got these little lines in here, and that is where the potter has pressed in their fingernail to create this second lip on the mortaria, which is just absolutely fantastic. So we've all been taking turns of holding it as if we're the potter.
Wow.
We can really feel the Roman pot as if we're there. So those are our bits of pottery. And last but not least, I think this is
My favourite. It is, yeah.
This is a piece of Roman floor tile, and we've got a lovely little dog paw print just in this left corner. And it's so sweet. So probably what's happened is they've laid out the tiles to be dried after they've been left in the sun and before they're fired. And a cheeky little dog has run across and left a paw print in the surface. We've got a few different examples on site like this, but this is our most impressive paw print. You can definitely imagine my dog doing something.
I was just going to say, it looks just like my dog's paw as well. Fantastic. And what do you think? How do they add to the interpretation of the building?
So what all of these items are showing us, especially the pottery variety, is not only are they creating their own local pots, maybe they're bringing them from somewhere like Oxford, maybe a little bit closer, but they are also able to import some items in as well. So I kind of imagine them to be kind of like maybe a middle class family who are wealthy enough to have a nice barn and import the odd thing, but not so rich that everything they've got is fine china. And it also suggests that they're doing lots of domestic activities on site too, like cooking. And we've also got all the animal bones as well, which show us what sorts of things they're eating.
That's great. But we haven't got just Roman, we've got Iron Age finds as well that help us understand who lived here even before. Can you show us what else was found in the Iron Age storage pits?
So we've got this amazing Iron Age storage pit cluster, and I really love it because I'm a prehistorian, so I love older stuff. That's my thing. So bear with me while I gush. So let's start with one of the most intriguing items. We've got this spindle whirl here. So those of you who do knitting and sewing probably will know exactly what this is, but for everyone else and for me, because I didn't know it when I first came on site, this is used as a weight. It would have had a stick underneath it, and it uses the weight to spin the wool as you're weaving wool into yarn so that you can then make woolen clothing, shoes, socks, that kind of thing. It's a lovely piece, and this is in the bottom of one of our Iron Age pits. We also had, from the same pit, we had these large cooking stones of about 9.5 kilograms of these in total. And these have, just like the pot, they have some areas that are black. You can't really see it very well because these are yet to be cleaned. But these areas of black tell me that it's been in a fire. So we think that these were probably used for cooking something on a fire, maybe boiling a kettle or maybe making some stew, something like that. And they're all perfectly round, which I believe helps create a nice heat, a regular heat for cooking. Also in our Iron Age storage pits, we're also finding large pieces of stone like this. Now this looks like just a stone at first glance, but it's actually a quernstone, and this is part of two stones that would have been put together to grind grain. It has a curved edge here, has a flat bit on top, and the bottom would have been flat, but I think it's been ground into an irregular shape. And this tells us that they were grinding their own grains here on site, maybe to make bread and other foodstuffs. So that's a fantastic piece, especially with the stones. And we've also got lots and lots of animal bone in these pits. We've got large pieces of cow bone like this. We've got pig, we've got sheep, and we've got there's a variety of ages with the animals too. Some of the teeth are showing us that maybe the animals were eaten because they died when they were quite young. But then some of the teeth are really, really worn down, which means that the animals were living to a much later part of their life. So they're probably more likely to be used for things like wool or milk for those particular animals. And we also have animal bones like this that have lots of cut marks in them, which shows us that they were being butchered, they were being eaten, and maybe they were even being used to use the skin off them as well. And our most amazing find from one of our pits that Jackie is going to bring over to us, we found a very, very large cow skull in the bottom of one of our storage pits. Thank you so much. So this amazing thing that Jackie and Ali have been cleaning absolutely beautifully. If I pop that down there, I'm going to lift it out. Thank you so much. It's Jackie doing a beautiful job. So this is our cow skull. This would have been the nasal cavity. There should be another bit of bone there, but it's gone. These are the eye sockets on one side. I'll turn it over, and on this side as well, part of the jaw. And then up here somewhere would have been where the horns were. So our different animal remains are really interesting because the individual pieces are showing us what they're like. These are showing us what they've been eating, what they've been farming. But our more interesting, larger pieces like this suggest something else. Maybe we're seeing kind of a little bit of insight into people's beliefs, because in the Iron Age, people didn't really waste large bits of meat. And we do also have, in a different pit, we also have another large bit of cow remains, which looks like maybe part of a torso. In the Iron Age, they really didn't waste good meat. You know, it took a lot of work to get hold of that, so they wouldn't do that. So we think that maybe they were using them almost like gifts to gods. Maybe thank you for the hunt, or please make our harvest good in the following years. Which is really, it's just really, really fascinating. And I do wonder about the pit where we've got the other part of the cow remains, where we had these lovely cooking stones, if maybe they all went in together as part of a larger ceremony that happened when they closed the storage pits. So they started the storage pits and then they were later used for these depositions. So I think that it's the end of the use of the pit that they are maybe having a ceremony.
Wow. And do you feel like there's anything else that it tells us about the people who are living in here?
It shows us about their beliefs. It shows us that they were just doing lots and lots of things. It kind of makes them really human, I think. You know, it's the sorts of things we do. We have our little rituals every day. And, you know, we have things, you know, don't cook, and, you know, we make things, especially if you're crafty. You know, it makes them feel really human and more like us.
Definitely. And what about that in combination with the newly found dog skeleton in the pit? What do you think that means?
That's so interesting. The dog skeleton is, yeah, absolutely fascinating. Again, you don't really see whole articulated, which means complete animal remains generally. So again, I think that this must be something a little bit ceremonial. It has some sort of meaning. It's the act of it has some sort of meaning, as opposed to some of the other pieces like cow bones that are probably just food waste. And I wonder, because we've got so many of them, I do wonder if not only could they be closing ceremonies for the end of the use life of the storage pit, but perhaps the end of the use life of the site whole as well, before the Iron Age people left, well before the Romans arrived. I think that they had a ceremony to close the site. They were done with this land, and now we're going somewhere else.
Wow. No, it's just so fascinating. Thank you so much, Karina. So I think it feels like we're starting to get a bit more of a detailed picture here of the people and the animals who are living here before the Romans arrived and after.
Yes.
I think it's over to you, Maya, now to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, time for some questions. But I think, first of all, yeah, it's amazing to see how much detail is coming about, not just about the Roman building and the people who are living there in the Roman period, but also the Iron Age people who are living there before them. So, what were their lives like? We're starting to see a glimpse of that. But also, then, what was the Roman life like? What was the building for? There was so much evidence. On the first tour, we saw how the building, evidence of the building itself was giving us some clues, but the artifacts that we're uncovering seem to be giving us some extra clues as well. And I would love to hear from people watching in the chat if you think that the evidence, the artifacts, the things that Karina and Amy have just shown us, if that changes what you think about how this building might have been used. And I can see a couple of people in the chat actually saying some really interesting things. We've got Linda who says that it does seem to be suggesting a dual use of the building, although the building itself might seem quite agricultural, quite farm-like. The artifacts seem quite domestic, so it seems like maybe there are some people living here. And Jill is also saying that, yeah, there does seem to be a melding of practices rather than Romans coming in with their own and completely new way of doing things. There's a variety of different things happening here, a combination of Iron Age things happening here, but also of Roman culture as well. And I think that leads us really nicely into one of our main questions, which is, are you thinking that the continuity of habitation is of Iron Age community that morphed into the Romano-British? I'll let Karina have a first crack at this, but I also have a couple of thoughts as well that I'll add if I need to. So Karina, what are your initial thoughts? Were the Iron Age people here, did they then become the Romano-British inhabitants, or do we think they're quite different populations?
Yeah, I think there is certainly continuity, as your amazingly astute viewers have noticed. There's definitely a lot of continuity happening, and the pottery, for example, is a really good example of that. When I first saw some of the pottery, I was a little bit confused. I was like, but it's Iron Age on the inside and Roman on the outside, and that's such a good example of them just using the things that they've always used, but now they're doing it in a more Roman way. So I think that's exactly right. I think we've got a great example of Romanization, the adoption of Roman culture here at Earth Trust at Whitnam Plumps.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it matches up with what we're all thinking. Really, is that the people that moved in were probably descendants or related to the Iron Age people who were living here beforehand and sort of adopted Roman culture, but also kept some elements of their own. And that's also what's interesting, I think, about the Isled Hall style building. We know that's the style of building that we've got, but it is something that is unique. It is adapted by the people that are using it, and they're kind of using this sort of British building style, but applying it to Roman ways of life and adapting it for the things that they needed in order to be part of Roman society. And there's a great question as well I think we can follow up with from Magnus, who asks, how is the material that is coming from far away getting to the site? What do we think? And how is the stuff that is being grown here getting out? That is a really, really great question that can also tell us a little bit about how the building was being used and fitting into the landscape. I think the first thing to point out is that we do think this Isled Hall building was part of a Roman villa estate, whether or not it was the main building where the family lived, or whether it was kind of an agricultural building where maybe the workers lived and worked as well. That's what we're trying to address at the moment. But then how does what we know about where the material was coming from and how things were being transported add to that picture? Karina, again, go for it. Have a first crack at answering that question, and I'll chip in if I need to.
So the main way I would say this is happening is because we have the Thames not far away, and there is a long history. I'm going to talk about prehistory. So back in prehistory, there is a long history of people going back into these areas where there is either you're on a main river or you're at the confluences of two rivers, and people will return to these spaces again and again and again. And I think that's partly because the river itself is a great source of water, is a great source of food, because we get oysters and things like that, but it's also an amazing way to transport goods. So something like our amazing Invictus bowl was most likely transported by water. Whereas some of the pottery that's coming more locally, it could have been transported by water, but maybe they were transporting it over land too. But as the Thames goes everywhere and it has lots of little estuaries that come off of it, I would also suggest that it's probably most likely coming across the water. So that's how I think things are going in. And I think that's also the way that things are going out as well, predominantly. Might not be the only way, but I think predominantly that is the way people are using it.
Yeah, absolutely. The site is so well situated. Like Karina says, the Thames would have been basically a highway where goods are being transported in and out. There's also the fact that the Roman settlement is quite close to Dorchester as well, which at the time would have been quite a major market trading town as well. So if whoever was living here was storing up and growing loads of grain, keeping it in this building, and then intermittently transporting it out to Dorchester for sale, it would have been, it's in a perfect place to grow crops, to sell them, to make some money, and then to come back and improve your buildings and keep expanding your Roman villa estate. We've had a new question come in. So I've just listened to what Karina was saying about the Iron Age people closing the site and moving away. Could they have moved away while they rebuilt in the new Roman style? So I think that's a really brilliant question. And as a starting point, with the Iron Age settlement, we actually think it was really big. I think our site director has estimated that there's probably something like 150 to 200 people living on the site in the Iron Age period. So as a starter, it probably seems like, maybe as you're saying that the population moved out, it wouldn't have been all of them that moved back. It would have been perhaps a couple of people who maybe moved back to start up the Roman villa estate. Karina, what do you think?
Yeah, I do feel like that would be unlikely that everybody left immediately. Everyone just woke up one day, you know what, I'm going to move to an Oppida. I really doubt that everyone would have done it at the same time. Where we're currently digging, though, it looks like this particular area was closed up and completely finalised. And I don't believe, based on the layout of the trench and where we've got the different Roman things overlaying the Iron Age features, I don't believe that they would have known that those things were there necessarily. However, in the other parts of the trench that we've excavated previously, or maybe even some areas where we haven't yet excavated, that might be a slightly different story. But with 250 people or more living here, it's unlikely that everyone just up and left at one point. But in this particular area we've been digging, I feel like the Romans wouldn't have even known that they were there necessarily.
Yeah, there does seem to be a bit of a gap between the Iron Age period, the end of the Iron Age settlement, and the start of the Roman one. Not a huge gap, but a gap nonetheless. And I think, again, what you were saying about, did the Romans know that the Iron Age settlement had been there when they started building? We actually have some really interesting evidence from the site about that. Because a couple of the, when we've excavated the Roman column bases, some of them are quite, quite shallow. They're not huge and deep. The foundations for them are fairly uniform. But then on some of the other ones, they've had to bulk up the foundations for the column bases. And that's because they've accidentally dug them through into where there had been an Iron Age storage pit underneath. So they dug them in and found the ground there to be much, much softer than the surrounding ground where the other columns have been placed. So you can kind of almost see the thought processes happening during the construction of the building. They've kind of started building it and gone, yeah, we're on firm ground here. And then they've come to some of the other pillars and gone, oh, actually the ground here is really soft. We need to make bigger foundations for these particular pillars. So that does suggest that maybe they didn't really know or couldn't really see what was there when they got there, which is, a really interesting thought, I think. We've had a new question come in from Ingrid, who has asked, can you give us a bit of a timescale when the big building was constructed? That is a fab question. Karina, do you feel happy to answer that?
I am not good with dates, and that's completely got out of my head. I know I knew it, and I don't know anymore.
No worries.
Maybe you could answer this one, Maya.
Yeah, absolutely. So from what we can see, the main building itself is slightly later, so during the 3rd and 4th centuries. And that actually coincides when there is a huge economic boom in Roman Britain. So Roman Britain becomes a huge producer and exporter of grain. So the fact that this huge building is being constructed around that time it seems to match up. It lines up with everything that, whoever was living here was sort of tapping into that economic boom, and they needed a huge building to store the grain that then went off for export. But if we think back to the tour that we did, and Ben mentioned that actually underneath the Roman building, not only do we have the older Iron Age settlement, we also have a slightly earlier Roman building. So there's more than one phase of construction to this Roman building. There is an earlier one sitting just underneath it. And actually some of the other evidence that we've got from around the site, there is some earlier Roman evidence there as well. So perhaps there was something here maybe in the later 1st and 2nd centuries as well. And then what they did is knock that down and rebuild a much bigger building on top of it as their wealth and their influence grew. So we have another question. I think we'll make this our last question. Magnus has asked, building on Ingrid's question, is there much evidence for how or when the Roman building fell out of use? Interesting question. Karina, any early thoughts on this?
Oh, again, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that. We mostly have kind of early and middle kind of Roman period items, but I haven't seen any evidence of later things such as medieval period stuff. So I'm wondering if it was before that happened. But I also feel like we need to come back another year and dig underneath the spoil heap so that we can see where the rest of the building is. And I think that's going to give us a better indication. But if you have some more information that I haven't picked up where, I think you can add to that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, again, like as you said, Karina, we don't actually have clear evidence of when that happened. It's not like everything stops at a particular point in the Roman period, and we don't have, for example, evidence of burning or anything that we could be like, okay, this is when it all ended. But as you say, we're not getting much later evidence. And what that does kind of suggest is that this building went out of use at the end of the Roman occupation. So when the Romans left, this building also went out of use around that time. And what we can see happened is that somebody came along and they've torn the building down. They've taken all of the material that was used to make the walls and the roof, and they have used it for other things. They've gone away and they've built other things with it. They haven't necessarily stayed on this site and continued to live here. We think that what has happened basically is that at the end of the Roman period, this building went out of use, but the building itself took on a new life. And that probably if we go out and look at some of the other like early medieval buildings and medieval buildings around, probably some of the stuff that those buildings are constructed with came from this Roman building, which is amazing to think about, that things are recycled over and over and over again. There was an earlier Roman building, was knocked down, used to build another Roman building, knocked down again, and used to build later buildings after the Romans had left. So we can see that archaeology doesn't sit still. The story of this building hasn't sat still. We are still learning and trying to understand what is here, and there is still so much more to find out. But from what we do know at the moment, it does look like this might have been a mixed-use building, probably 2 stories, being used for people who are living here, but also working here as well. But as I say, there is more to find out. There is more evidence to uncover. We've got a couple more days left on the dig, and hopefully we'll be able to come back next year and continue the excavation as well. So on that note, one last thank you to everyone who has supported the dig, whether you've come to join us on site and in the field, or whether you're supporting from home from a distance. Thank you so much for your support. Everything that we've discovered so far is really helping to understand this landscape and contribute to our understanding of what was happening in Oxfordshire in the period between the Iron Age and the Romans as well. So we hope you've enjoyed the tour, and we hope to see you soon at our next online event or on our next dig. If you'd like to follow the story and continue to see what we find in the last few days of the dig, then check our live updates feed at digventures.com/live, or use the QR code on the left, or find out how you can come and get involved on another of our digs in the future at digventures.com/calendar, or use the QR code on the right. Once again, thank you to everyone who has joined us on site, in the field, or online. We hope to see you again soon.